Welcome back everyone, and thanks for tuning into the channel where everyday objects turn into extraordinary stories and where pocket change can spark million-dollar conversations. And today we're diving into one of the most talked about modern coin legends. The story often told among collectors about a 2007 D Lincoln 1 cent that is said to command a jaw-dropping valuation reaching as high as $17 million, not because it was made of gold or issued as a special commemorative, but because of a convergence of errors, mistakes, and unlikely possibilities that, if ever proven authentic and uniquely combined on a single surviving coin, would place it among the most valuable small-denomination coins imaginable. And whether you see this as a real possibility, a cautionary tale, or a fascinating example of how numismatic value is created, the story itself reveals how fragile perfection is at the mint and how tiny deviations can balloon into staggering worth. The 2007 D cent comes from the Denver Mint during the modern zinc era of Lincoln cents, a period when billions of coins were struck quickly using copper-plated zinc planchets, automated presses, and quality control systems designed for speed rather than artisanal precision. And under normal circumstances, a circulated 2007 D penny is worth exactly 1 cent, sometimes less in buying power. Yet the narrative around this particular coin hinges on the idea that multiple catastrophic minting failures could have occurred simultaneously, creating a one-of-a-kind artifact that defies ordinary classification, beginning with the possibility of a wrong planchet error, where the cent may have been struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or even another metal entirely, such as a leftover copper alloy blank, an experimental alloy, or a foreign planchet of similar diameter but radically different composition. And while such errors are rare in the modern era, they are not theoretically impossible, especially during transitional periods or test runs. And if a 2007 D cent were somehow struck on a solid copper planchet weighing the pre-1982 standard of approximately 3.11 grams rather than the post-1982 zinc core of about 2.5 grams, and if metallurgical analysis confirmed it as a genuine mint error rather than a plated or altered piece, its value would already skyrocket into the high 6 or 7 figures. But the legend doesn't stop there, because the $17 million claim assumes not just one error but a cascade of them, layered in a way that multiplies rarity rather than merely adding to it, one such layer being a dramatic double die obverse combined with a rotated reverse, meaning the design elements on the obverse would show strong, naked-eye doubling on inscriptions like Liberty, Indiana, God We Trust, and the date 2007, while the reverse, when the coin is flipped vertically, would be misaligned by an extreme degree, possibly approaching a full 180-degree rotation, a combination almost unheard of in modern cents, especially when paired with other defects. And then there is the possibility of an off-center strike so severe that a large portion of the planchet is blank, yet the full date and mint mark remain visible, which is a critical factor in error coin valuation because without the date and mint mark, attribution becomes uncertain, but with them intact on an off-center coin, desirability increases dramatically. And imagine further that this off-center strike occurred alongside a broadstrike error caused by the collar failing to engage, resulting in a coin with an expanded diameter, distorted rim, and stretched design, all while retaining legibility of key identifiers. And then add to this the notion of a major die clash, where the obverse and reverse dies struck each other without a planchet in between, transferring ghostly impressions of opposing design elements onto the wrong side of the coin, such as Lincoln's profile faintly appearing behind the Lincoln Memorial or the memorial columns bleeding through onto Lincoln's face. And while die clashes alone are collectible, a massive, unpolished clash combined with other errors would be extraordinary. And the story escalates further with claims of a retained cud or massive die break, where a chunk of the die broke away, leaving a raised, irregular blob of metal on the coin's surface that interrupts the design, possibly covering part of the date or mint mark. Yet in this hypothetical case, not obscuring it entirely, because total obscuration would reduce attribution clarity. And then there is the whispered possibility of a missing or incorrect mint mark anomaly, even though by 2007 mint marks were punched into the dies rather than the coins, making such errors exceedingly rare. But a repunched mint mark, over mint mark, or ghost mint mark caused by die damage could still occur. And if a 2007 D cent showed evidence suggesting an over mint mark such as D over S, or D over nothing in a convincingly natural way, it would ignite intense debate and scrutiny. And beyond visible errors, metallurgical anomalies add another dimension, because a cent struck on a planchet with incorrect alloy ratios, such as excessive copper thickness, internal voids in the zinc core, or contamination by other metals, could exhibit unusual color, weight, and acoustic properties. And if advanced testing like XRF analysis revealed a composition inconsistent with standard mint specifications yet consistent with known experimental or transitional alloys, the coin's significance would deepen, and the $17 million valuation story often leans heavily on the idea of provenance, suggesting that this coin was discovered in an unlikely place, perhaps in a sealed mint bag, a government storage facility, or a collection tied to a former mint employee. Because provenance can legitimize extraordinary claims, and without it, even the most spectacular error faces skepticism, but with it, the numismatic community becomes more receptive, and then there's the factor of condition, because error coins can be valuable even in circulated states, but a high-grade example showing minimal wear, sharp detail where present, and original surfaces would exponentially increase desirability, especially if grading services authenticated it as mint state despite the errors, assigning a numerical grade that confirms its preservation. And when you stack all these possibilities together, wrong planchet, dramatic double die, extreme rotation, off-center broadstrike, massive die clash, retained cud, metallurgical anomaly, unusual mint mark characteristics, and pristine condition, you begin to understand how storytellers arrive at such an astronomical figure, because value in numismatics is not linear, it's exponential. Rarity multiplied by demand multiplied by narrative, and a coin that embodies multiple textbook-level errors simultaneously becomes more than currency. It becomes a physical record of mechanical failure, human oversight, and industrial imperfection, and the year 2007 itself adds an ironic twist, because it was not a transitional year in terms of design or composition, making any major anomaly stand out even more starkly, unlike 1982 or 2009 where known changes occurred, and that contrast fuels fascination, as collectors ask how such a thing could happen when systems were supposedly stable, and the Denver Mint's high production volumes further complicate the picture, because while higher output increases the chance of some errors slipping through, it also makes identifying a truly unique survivor more difficult, which is why authentication would be relentless, involving multiple grading services, independent experts, metallurgists, and die variety specialists, each scrutinizing the coin for signs of post-mint alteration, because plating, machining, chemical exposure, and other tricks can mimic genuine errors, and only consensus among experts would allow such a coin to be accepted as legitimate, and the market dynamics behind a $17 million valuation are also worth exploring, because no coin is worth anything unless someone is willing to pay that price, and in this narrative, the valuation assumes competition among ultra-wealthy collectors, museums, and institutions seeking the ultimate modern era coin, something that would headline exhibitions and redefine what a penny can be worth, and the psychological appeal cannot be ignored, because a 1-cent coin transformed into an object worth more than luxury mansions challenges assumptions about value and scarcity, making it irresistible to those who want to own a piece of that paradox, and media attention would amplify demand, with headlines proclaiming the most valuable penny ever, fueling a feedback loop of hype and desire. And even skeptics contribute by debating the claim, keeping the story alive, and while many experienced numismatists caution that such extreme valuations are speculative and contingent on unprecedented combinations of factors, the story persists because it highlights real principles of error coin collecting, namely that mistakes at the mint are finite, unrepeatable events, and when documented, they become frozen moments of industrial history. And whether or not a 2007 cent ever truly sells for $17 million, the discussion itself educates collectors about what to look for, encouraging closer inspection of modern change, weighing coins, examining alignment, studying die markers, and understanding how value is constructed, and it also serves as a reminder that the line between ordinary and extraordinary can be razor thin, defined by microns of metal and fractions of a second in a high-speed press. Next. 2001 cent. Today we're diving deep into a fascinating and often debated numismatic legend, the idea of a 2001 cent coin that could be worth as much as $16 million, a value so shocking that it forces us to rethink what money, mistakes, and rarity really mean, because on its face the year 2000 penny is one of the most common modern coins ever produced. Struck in enormous quantities as the world crossed into a new millennium, yet the story surrounding this particular cent is built on the premise that perfection at the mint is an illusion and that when errors align in just the right way, even the most ordinary object can become a once-in-a-lifetime artifact. The year 2000 Lincoln cent was produced at a time of immense pressure on the United States Mint, with demand for new coins surging as people saved millennium-date items, hoarded rolls, and sought keepsakes marking the transition into a new century, and this high-speed, high-volume environment created fertile ground for mistakes, especially when combined with aging equipment, human oversight, and the complexities of modern minting technology, which relies on thin copper plating over zinc cores, laser-engraved dies, and automated inspection systems that are designed to catch most problems but not all of them, and the $16 million valuation story assumes not a single error, but a convergence of multiple severe anomalies on one surviving coin, each rare on its own, but together almost mythical, beginning with the possibility of a wrong planchet error, one of the most dramatic mistakes a coin can exhibit, where a cent is struck on a blank intended for another denomination or another metal altogether, such as a dime planchet, a foreign coin blank, or even a leftover copper alloy planchet from pre-1982 stock. And if a 2000 cent were struck on a solid copper planchet weighing around 3.11 grams rather than the standard zinc core of about 2.5 grams, and if that composition were confirmed through non-destructive testing as genuine and original, it would immediately place the coin among the most important modern errors known, because by 2000 the mint had been using copper-plated zinc for nearly 2 decades, making true solid copper errors extraordinarily rare, and the story intensifies when collectors imagine that this wrong planchet error was accompanied by a dramatic double die obverse, a type of error created during the die-making process when the hub impresses the design into the die more than once at misaligned angles, resulting in strong doubling that is part of the die itself rather than the result of mechanical vibration, and such doubling, if bold and visible without magnification on inscriptions like Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date 2000, would elevate the coin into elite territory, especially because major double dies from the modern era are far scarcer than those from earlier decades, and then there is the possibility of a rotated die error, where the obverse and reverse dies were misaligned in the press, causing the reverse to appear rotated when the coin is flipped vertically, and while minor rotations are known, an extreme rotation approaching 90 or even 180 degrees would be highly unusual for a modern cent, and when paired with a doubled die, the rarity would multiply rather than simply add, because collectors value combinations of errors far more than isolated mistakes, and the legend grows further with the idea of an off-center strike, where the planchet was not seated correctly in the press, resulting in part of the design missing and a crescent of blank metal visible, and in this hypothetical $16 million coin, the off-center strike would be severe enough to be visually dramatic yet precise enough to leave the full date and mint mark visible, a crucial factor because without them, the coin's identity would be compromised. And then imagine that this off-center strike also occurred without the retaining collar functioning properly, creating a broadstrike effect where the coin spread outward, increasing in diameter and displaying a distorted or absent rim, a combination that demonstrates multiple simultaneous failures in the striking process, and the errors don't stop there, because one of the most intriguing aspects of the story is the possibility of a major die clash, an event that happens when the obverse and reverse dies strike each other without a planchet in between, transferring elements of one design onto the other in ghostly, mirrored impressions, and if such a clash were strong and left unpolished, it could create surreal images like traces of the Lincoln Memorial columns appearing on Lincoln's portrait or outlines of Lincoln's bust showing up on the reverse, and while die clashes are known and collectible, a massive, clearly visible clash on a modern cent, combined with other errors, would be exceptionally rare, and adding to this is the notion of a retained cut or significant die break, where a portion of the die cracked or broke away, leaving a raised, irregular blob of metal on the struck coin, and if this cut intersected with major design elements without completely obscuring them, it would further enhance the coin's uniqueness, because die breaks are physical evidence of a die's failure, frozen in time on the coin's surface, and then there's the question of mint marks, because by 2000 mint marks were part of the die itself rather than being punched into each coin, making classic over mint mark errors nearly obsolete. yet anomalies can still occur, such as repunched die elements, filled mint marks, or damaged areas around the mint mark that create the illusion of doubling or overpunching. And if a 2000 cent showed an unusual D or S mint mark with characteristics suggesting an extraordinary die anomaly, it would ignite intense debate among specialists, and beyond visible errors, metallurgical anomalies play a crucial role in the $16 million narrative, because the modern sense copper plating is extremely thin, and errors such as missing plating, split plating, improper alloy ratios, internal zinc voids, or contamination by other metals can create unusual colors, textures, and weights. And if advanced testing like X-ray fluorescence analysis revealed a composition inconsistent with known mint specifications yet consistent with experimental or accidental deviations, the coin's scientific significance would add another layer of value, and provenance becomes critical at this point, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary documentation, and the legend often suggests that such a coin could have originated from an unopened mint bag, a sealed Federal Reserve box, or a collection connected to a former mint employee or contractor, because documented chains of custody lend credibility and reduce the likelihood of post-mint alteration, which is always the greatest concern with spectacular errors. And condition is another multiplier, because while error coins can be valuable in circulated states, a high-grade example showing minimal wear, original luster where present, and sharp detail in unaffected areas would command far more attention, especially if professional grading services authenticated it and assigned a numerical grade that confirmed its preservation despite the errors. And when all these factors are combined, wrong planchet, bold double die, extreme rotation, off-center broadstrike, massive die clash, retained cud, mint mark anomaly, metallurgical irregularity, strong provenance, and exceptional condition, the valuation enters a realm where traditional price guides no longer apply, and instead, value is determined by what the market can bear, driven by competition among elite collectors, museums, and institutions seeking a singular object that represents the ultimate modern minting failure, and the year 2000 itself adds symbolic weight, because it marks a cultural milestone, and an error coin from that year embodies both the optimism and the imperfections of a world entering a new era, making it more than just a coin, but a historical artifact, and media attention would amplify this effect, with headlines proclaiming a penny worth $16 million, fueling public fascination and drawing new eyes to the hobby, and even skepticism plays a role, because debate keeps the story alive, encouraging experts to analyze, critique, and refine their understanding of what is possible. And while many seasoned numismatists caution that such valuations are speculative and contingent on unprecedented combinations of factors, the story persists because it illustrates real principles of numismatic value, namely that rarity is not just about age or metal content, but about circumstances, documentation, and demand, and that mistakes, often dismissed as flaws, can become the defining features that elevate an object beyond its intended purpose, and whether or not a 2001 cent coin ever truly sells for $16 million, the legend serves as an invitation to look closer at the coins we handle every day, to weigh them, inspect them, and question their uniformity, because the fascination lies not just in the possibility of wealth, but in the understanding that history, technology, and human error intersect in even the smallest pieces of metal, and that sometimes, value is hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right combination of errors, the right moment of discovery, and the right audience to transform a humble penny into a story that captures the imagination of collectors and casual viewers alike. Next. 2016 1 cent. Today, this is the place where ordinary pocket change turns into extraordinary stories and where the smallest details can unlock the biggest mysteries, and today we are diving into one of the most fascinating modern coin legends to ever circulate among collectors and curious minds alike. The idea that a seemingly ordinary 2016 1 cent coin could, under an extraordinary and almost unbelievable set of circumstances, be worth as much as $15 million, a valuation that sounds impossible at first glance but becomes strangely compelling once you understand how errors, mistakes, mechanical failures, and human oversight at the mint can combine into a perfect storm of rarity, because the 2016 Lincoln cent is one of the most common coins of the modern era, produced in staggering numbers at multiple mints using highly automated processes, thin copper-plated zinc planchets, and dies designed to last through millions of strikes, yet it is precisely this high-speed, high-volume environment that creates the conditions where catastrophic anomalies, though incredibly rare, are still theoretically possible, and the $15 million story is not about a single flaw but about a convergence of multiple severe and well-documented categories of mint errors, each one valuable on its own, but exponentially more significant when imagined together on a single surviving coin. Starting with the foundational idea of a wrong planchet error, which is among the most dramatic mistakes in modern numismatics, where a coin is struck on a blank intended for a different denomination or even a different metal composition entirely, and in the case of a 2016 cent, the most tantalizing possibility would be a strike on a solid copper planchet of the pre-1982 alloy weighing approximately 3.11 grams instead of the standard post-1982 copper-plated zinc planchet weighing around 2.5 grams, a scenario that would require a leftover blank, a test piece, or an accidental mix up during material handling, and while the mint's controls make such an error extraordinarily unlikely in the modern era, it is not physically impossible, and if metallurgical testing confirmed such a composition as original and unaltered, the coin would already be considered one of the most important modern cent errors ever discovered. And the story grows more compelling when this wrong planchet error is imagined alongside a bold double die obverse, a true hub doubling created during the die making process rather than mechanical doubling during the strike, resulting in strong, raised, and clearly separated doubling visible to the naked eye on design elements like Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date 2016, and major double dies from the 21st century are far rarer than their mid-20th century counterparts because of improved hubbing technology, making any dramatic example from 2016 a numismatic event on its own, and when collectors speculate about a $15 million valuation, they often envision doubling so pronounced that it rivals famous varieties like the 1955 double die cent, but appearing on a coin that should, by all expectations, be mechanically perfect, and then there is the possibility of an extreme die rotation error, where the obverse and reverse dies were misaligned in the press, causing the reverse design to appear rotated by an unusual angle when the coin is flipped vertically, and while slight rotations are known and relatively common, a rotation approaching 90 degrees or even a full 180 degrees would be astonishing for a modern cent, especially if paired with other errors, because it would indicate a significant failure in die installation or retention, and the legend deepens further with the idea of an off-center strike, one of the most visually striking errors a coin can have, where the planchet was not properly centered in the striking chamber, resulting in part of the design being missing and a blank crescent of metal visible. And for maximum value, such an off-center strike would need to be dramatic yet precise, leaving the full date and mint mark intact and clearly readable, because attribution is everything in numismatics, and a spectacular error without identifying information loses much of its potential significance. And adding another layer, collectors imagine that this off-center strike occurred without the retaining collar engaging properly, producing a broadstrike effect, where the coin spreads outward beyond its normal diameter, lacks a defined rim, and shows distorted design elements stretched toward the edges, a combination that demonstrates multiple simultaneous failures in the striking process, and the narrative continues with the possibility of a massive die clash, an event where the obverse and reverse dies strike each other without a planchet in between, transferring ghost-like impressions of one side's design onto the other, and while minor die clashes are relatively common and often polished away, a severe, unpolished clash on a modern cent would be remarkable, especially if it left clear impressions such as parts of the Lincoln Memorial columns appearing on Lincoln's portrait or outlines of Lincoln's profile faintly visible on the reverse, creating a surreal, layered image that tells the story of a moment when the minting process went completely awry. And then there is the notion of a retained cud or major die break, where a portion of the die cracked or broke off but remained partially in place, resulting in a raised, irregular blob of metal on the struck coin, and if such a cut intersected with important design elements without entirely obscuring them, it would add yet another tangible sign of die failure, frozen in metal, and die breaks are particularly fascinating because they often worsen over time, meaning each coin struck shows a slightly different progression of damage, and a unique, early-stage retained cut on a 2016 cent would be highly prized, and the discussion would not be complete without addressing mint mark anomalies, because by 2016 mint marks were integrated into the dies rather than punched individually into each coin, making classic over mint mark errors virtually obsolete, yet anomalies can still occur through die damage, die polishing, or hubbing errors that affect the mint mark area. And a 2016 cent showing an unusual mint mark characteristic, such as apparent doubling, distortion, or remnants, suggesting a hubbing anomaly, would spark intense debate and study among specialists, and beyond what the eye can see, metallurgical errors add another powerful dimension to the $15 million story, because the modern cent's copper plating is extremely thin, and errors such as missing plating, split plating, improper alloy ratios, internal zinc voids, or contamination by other metals can result in unusual coloration, texture, weight, and even sound when dropped, and if advanced non-destructive testing like X-ray fluorescence analysis revealed a composition inconsistent with mint specifications yet consistent with an accidental or experimental deviation, the scientific importance of the coin would dramatically increase, and provenance plays a critical role at this level of valuation, because extraordinary claims demand extraordinary documentation. And stories surrounding such a coin often suggest it was discovered in an unopened Federal Reserve box, a sealed mint bag, or a collection with a documented connection to a mint employee or contractor, because a clear chain of custody reduces skepticism and helps rule out post-mint alteration, which is always the greatest concern when a coin exhibits extreme anomalies, and condition is another crucial multiplier, because while error coins can be valuable even in circulated states, a high-grade example showing minimal wear, original surfaces, and sharp detail in unaffected areas would command far more attention. Especially if professional grading services authenticated it, encapsulated it, and assigned a numerical grade that confirmed its preservation despite the errors, and once all these factors are combined, wrong planchet, bold double die, extreme rotation, off-center broadstrike, massive die clash, retained cud, mint mark anomaly, metallurgical irregularity, strong provenance, and exceptional condition, the conversation moves beyond traditional price guides and into the realm of unique artifacts, where value is determined by demand, narrative, and competition among elite collectors, museums, and institutions seeking an object that represents the ultimate modern minting failure, and the year 2016 itself adds an interesting layer of symbolism, because it sits firmly within the digital age, a time when production processes were assumed to be highly controlled and error-free, making any major anomaly from this period especially compelling as proof that even the most advanced systems are vulnerable to imperfection, and media attention would amplify this effect dramatically, with headlines proclaiming a penny worth $15 million, drawing public fascination, skepticism, excitement, and renewed interest in coin collecting as a whole. And even those who doubt the valuation contribute to the story by keeping it alive through debate and analysis, encouraging deeper understanding of how mint errors occur and how value is assigned, and while many experienced numismatists caution that such a valuation is speculative and dependent on an unprecedented convergence of factors, the legend persists because it illustrates core truths about numismatics, that rarity is not just about age or precious metal content, but about circumstance, documentation. Last 1989 1-cent coin. Today we're exploring one of the most intriguing and controversial modern coin legends, the idea that a 1989 1-cent coin could, under an incredibly rare and specific set of circumstances, be worth as much as $14 million, a number that sounds almost unbelievable when attached to a penny, yet becomes fascinatingly plausible once you understand how minting errors, production mistakes, transitional possibilities, and collector demand can converge into a perfect storm of numismatic value, because the 1989 Lincoln cent sits at an interesting crossroads in United States coinage history, firmly within the copper-plated zinc era that began in 1982, yet still close enough to major changes in minting technology, die preparation, and quality control that certain catastrophic errors, while extraordinarily rare, were still within the realm of possibility. And the $14 million story does not hinge on a single defect but on the hypothetical existence of a unique coin bearing multiple high-level errors simultaneously, each one rare on its own, but exponentially more valuable when imagined together on a single authentic specimen, beginning with one of the most powerful possibilities in modern numismatics, a wrong planchet error, where a 1-cent coin is struck on a blank intended for a different denomination or an entirely different metal composition. And in the context of 1989, this possibility becomes especially intriguing because the mint was still relatively early in its transition to copper-plated zinc, meaning that legacy copper alloy materials, experimental blanks, or foreign planchets could theoretically have been present within the production environment, and if a 1989 cent were struck on a solid copper planchet weighing approximately 3.11 grams instead of the standard 2.5 gram zinc core, and if metallurgical testing confirmed that composition as original and not the result of post-mint plating or alteration, it would immediately rank among the most important modern cent errors known, because genuine solid copper cents dated after 1982 are among the most sought-after and heavily scrutinized coins in the hobby, and a confirmed 1989 example would stand out dramatically due to the year's high mintages and the expectation of uniformity. And the narrative intensifies further when collectors imagine that this wrong planchet error was accompanied by a bold double die obverse, a true hub doubling created during the die-making process when the working die receives misaligned impressions from the hub, resulting in strong, raised, and clearly separated doubling that is part of the die itself rather than the result of mechanical vibration during striking, and in this scenario the doubling would be visible without magnification on key design elements such as Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date 1989, with clear notching, separation, and thickness that rivals famous varieties like the 1955 double die cent. And major double dies from the late 20th century are far scarcer than earlier examples because of improved hubbing technology, making any dramatic double die from 1989 an event in itself, and when combined with a wrong planchet error, the rarity multiplies rather than simply adds, because collectors place extraordinary premiums on error combinations that demonstrate failures at multiple stages of the minting process, and the story does not stop there, because another layer often discussed in the $14 million valuation is the possibility of an extreme die rotation error, where the obverse and reverse dies were misaligned in the press so that when the coin is flipped vertically the reverse appears rotated by a significant angle, and while small rotations of a few degrees are known, a rotation approaching 90 degrees or even a full 180 degrees would be astonishing for a modern cent, especially from a year like 1989 when quality control systems were already well established, and such a rotation would indicate a major failure in die installation or retention, and when paired with a double die and wrong planchet, it would suggest that multiple independent safeguards failed simultaneously, and then there is the visually dramatic possibility of an off-center strike, one of the most immediately striking errors a coin can display, where the planchet was not properly centered within the striking chamber, resulting in part of the design missing and a blank crescent of metal visible along the edge, and for maximum value such an off-center strike would need to be severe enough to be obvious yet precise enough to leave the full date and mint mark visible, because attribution is critical in numismatics and a spectacular error without identifying details loses much of its potential significance. And in this hypothetical $14 million coin the off-center strike would be paired with another mechanical failure, the absence or malfunction of the retaining collar, resulting in a broadstrike effect where the coin spreads outward beyond its normal diameter, lacks a well-defined rim, and shows distorted design elements stretching toward the edges, a clear sign that the striking process broke down at multiple points at once, and as if that were not enough, the legend often includes the possibility of a major die clash, an event that occurs when the obverse and reverse dies strike each other without a planchet in between, transferring ghost-like impressions of one side's design onto the other. And while minor die clashes are relatively common and usually polished away, a severe, unpolished clash on a modern cent would be remarkable, especially if it left clear impressions such as parts of the Lincoln Memorial appearing faintly behind Lincoln's portrait or outlines of Lincoln's profile visible on the reverse, creating a layered, almost surreal appearance that tells the story of a moment when the minting process went completely off script, and adding yet another dimension is the idea of a retained cut or major die break, where a portion of the die cracked or broke away but remained partially in place, resulting in a raised, irregular mass of metal on the struck coin, and if such a cut intersected with important design elements without completely obscuring them, it would provide physical evidence of die failure frozen in time. And die breaks are particularly fascinating to collectors because they often progress over time, meaning each coin struck shows a slightly different stage of damage, and a unique early stage retained cut on a 1989 cent would be highly prized, and the discussion would be incomplete without addressing mint mark anomalies, because in 1989 mint marks were still punched into the working dies by hand rather than being integrated during hubbing, which means repunched mint marks, misplaced mint marks, and other anomalies were still possible, and a 1989 cent showing a dramatic repunched mint mark or a misplaced mint mark in combination with other errors would further elevate its significance, especially because such features are clear indicators of human involvement and error in the production process, and beyond what can be seen with the naked eye. Metallurgical anomalies add another powerful layer to the $14 million narrative, because the copper plating on modern cents is extremely thin, and errors such as missing plating, split plating, improper alloy ratios, internal zinc voids, or contamination by other metals can result in unusual coloration, texture, weight, and even sound, and if advanced non-destructive testing such as X-ray fluorescence analysis revealed a composition inconsistent with known mint specifications yet consistent with accidental or experimental deviations, the scientific importance of the coin would increase dramatically, and provenance becomes absolutely critical at this level of valuation, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary documentation, and stories surrounding such a coin often suggest it was discovered in an unopened Federal Reserve bag, a sealed mint box, or a collection with a documented connection to a mint employee or contractor, because a clear chain of custody reduces skepticism and helps rule out post-mint alteration, which is always the greatest concern when a coin exhibits extreme anomalies, and condition is another crucial multiplier, because while coins can be valuable even in circulated states, a high-grade example showing minimal wear, original surfaces, and sharp detail in unaffected areas would command far more attention, especially if professional grading services authenticated it, encapsulated it, and assigned a numerical grade confirming its preservation despite the errors, and when all of these factors are combined, wrong planchet, bold double die, extreme die rotation, off-center broadstrike, massive die clash, retained cud, mint mark anomaly, metallurgical irregularity, strong provenance, and exceptional condition, the conversation moves beyond standard price guides and into the realm of unique artifacts, where value is determined not by metal content or face value but by rarity, narrative, and competition among elite collectors, museums, and institutions seeking an object that represents the ultimate modern minting failure. And the year 1989 itself adds an additional layer of intrigue, because it sits near the end of a decade marked by rapid technological advancement and increasing automation, a time when many assumed minting processes were becoming nearly flawless, making any major anomaly from this period especially compelling as proof that even advanced systems are vulnerable to imperfection.